We'll talk in great detail about anti-defection law being defective, because I have very strong opinion on that too.
Most of the people who defect end up in some political dungeon, as I said, in my piece. They may enjoy some fame right now, but they're going to be soon forgotten. So something that India no longer has for quite some time now, it's free and fair electoral competition.
Hello and welcome. You're watching me, Sanket Upadhyay, on The Federal. The show is called AI with Sanket. This is the AI of news, because news in India today requires not artificial but analytical intelligence. There has been a split in the Trinamool Congress. The numbers are a little unclear as to how many people may go ahead and join the BJP. However, there is a crisis in the TMC, and that is confirmed. So why exactly is this happening? Is this a healthy practice in democracy? And most importantly, there are laws in this country to prevent defection. But are those laws enough, and should those laws be stricter or not exist at all? How do you ensure that the people's mandate is respected? I have with me a political commentator, a very noted voice, Gilles Verniers. Thank you very much, Gilles, for joining us. We saw that you wrote quite a spirited piece where you listed out reasons like regional factors, moving on, ideology, careering, and all such points related to this big shift that we saw in the Trinamool Congress. But I guess the story has moved on from there. I want to know first your initial reaction to the way this is happening, the manner in which this is happening. Would you categorize this as some sort of salami slicing being done by the BJP of the opposition just to shore up the numbers in Lok Sabha?
Well, I would not exactly call it salami slicing. This is more like a party put on the chopping block, right? Because it's a big chunk. Actually, the most of their MPs allegedly, shifting from support from their own party to the NDA. What I find interesting is the shape that it's taking, right? Instead of resigning, which is the usual form, in recent years, and calling for fresh, elections within, 6 months or so, they're basically splitting the party vertically, attempting to create a new entity. What new entity? That's still unclear, and profess support to the BJP. So for the BJP, it's a net gain because they have the support of a large number of new MPs, around 20 or so. The numbers, of course, will keep shifting, and they don't have to get into the trouble of fielding those candidates or other candidates in elections, which takes time, which would be costly. So it's really an immediate gain for them in the form of a party split.
Gilles, we've seen this not happening for the first time. The BJP has been accused of engineering a split in the Shiv Sena, a split in the NCP, and now this is the third big split which allegedly the BJP has engineered. In your understanding, what can be that motivation where a majority chunk of the party, of an opposition party, just decides to break and merge or ally with a larger entity like the BJP?
So you have different actors involved, right? From the BJP's point of view, the interest is very clear, right? They cut down to size major opposition parties, and they get a net gain in terms of support in the Lok Sabha. The goal for the BJP, of course, is to get to that 2/3 majority in the Lok Sabha, which would enable it to bring on the kind of constitutional change that he's been dreaming on for quite some time and has not been able to do so for lack of such majority until now. So the gains are very clear. For the individual MPs, we can only speculate and surmise that there is an element of individual gain to be derived from shifting support from one party to another. This is, the hardest thing, of course, to prove. But there is an element of individual opportunism and probably individual greed also that is involved. But what I said in my piece is that we cannot summarize this. We cannot limit this to the sum of individual opportunism alone, because precisely there is an element of collective decision. So many MPs, shifting support at the same time. And what I point is that there's a number of other factors, more systemic factors involved. I mean, at the end of the day, the question is what makes Indian MPs or MLAs so prompt to shift party allegiance, right? And according to me, it has a lot to do with, who gets recruited to become an MP in the first place, the condition in which they are recruited, the condition in which they have to compete. Most MPs in India are one-term MPs. That has to do with the competitiveness, the individual incumbency that exists in Indian politics. The cost of entry is extremely high, so it creates incentives for people who have resources and who are willing to stake a large fortune to get into an elective position for a short time. And then there are regional factors. In the case of Bengal, when the party loses, they usually lose for good. I mean, that's been the experience, of course, with the communists, who have been utterly destroyed after the TMC took over in 2012. And now the TMC is facing a similar predicament. And so for individual MPs, people who have a career, who have, who hope to have a longer political career, there's a really, really long desert, opening in front of them, and that creates further incentives, right? And then lastly, and I'm sure we'll talk about this, is that the laws that sort of prevail over the question of defections and change of party affiliations are utterly defective, right? The anti-defection law is defective, if I may, actually it provides a roadmap about how to go about changing party affiliation rather than actually prevent it. And that's what we've seen in recent years. A larger and larger number of individuals or factions within parties changing camp in ways that do not fall under the ambit of the anti-defection law.
But, we'll talk in great detail about anti-defection law being defective, because I have very strong opinion on that too. But before that, just want to know from you, this winner takes it all sort of situation in Indian politics is not just unique to West Bengal. We have seen this happen in Andhra Pradesh. We've seen it happen in Tamil Nadu also. And it is not restricted just to an electoral win. It kind of percolates down in a post-election scenario also, where people will keep breaking and joining the victor or the winner. In a situation like this, where does one draw the line? I mean, are we to expect this to become a new normal where post-victory, there will be no opposition?
Yeah. So if it was only a matter of individual decision, people making career choices and choosing in a way to betray their own party, to join others, there would not be much that one could do against, because after all, it is their decision. One can regret the decision. I would point that they are betraying the mandate that they receive from their voters by switching side in that way. But technically speaking, nothing illegal. Now, of course, the condition under which this is happening, what kind of incentives are being offered, and how one party uses its money power to incentivize those people to jump ship, that's obviously extremely reprehensible. But it's the hardest thing to prove, and again, there's very little that the law can do. The only thing that voters have is the power of the vote, and so they may decide to punish those individuals after they switch side. And if you look at the record of party switchers who contest elections subsequently on another party ticket, they usually don't do that well, right? So these defections are more done, for the immediate gain than for the long-term, political prospect of the individuals. And in fact, most of the people who defect end up in some political dungeon, as I said, in my piece, I mean, they may enjoy some fame right now, but they're going to be soon forgotten. I mean, who are the 16 or 17 MLAs who defected with Jyotiradittya Scindia? I mean, they've sort of more or less disappeared. And so the problem is that this process is taking place in a complete opacity, right? And there's room within that for all kind of ill practices. But again, very hard to pin down anyone's exact responsibility. When is it that people cross the line? It's very difficult to define, as you said, where that line even is in the first place. The larger problem in my mind is that we have a party in power that will use every means at its disposal to dispose of its opponents, right? So something that India no longer has for quite some time. No, it's free and fair electoral competition. Because you have a party that concentrates much of the resources devoted to public political funding, because you have a party in power that will use its position to create legal complications for its opponents, and that will use the resources at its disposal, to cut down its own opponents between elections. Right. The other fundamental problem is that it is a practice that alters the outcome of elections outside of the places where they should be decided, which is the ballot box. You have meetings taking places in party offices, in ministerial residences, or private, or whichever private space where majorities change hand. By my count, there are 8 state governments in India that have changed hands since 2016 because of these post-election resignations, which obviously are manufactured. They don't happen automatically, spontaneously, even after, particularly after, a party actually wins an election. And then you undo that by engineering some, resignations. And that's deeply troublesome, because a condition for a functioning democracy is that parties should accept the outcome, not try to change in ex post by providing all kinds of incentives, right and wrong, to individual representatives.
You see, Gilles, we've seen all sorts of political permutations attempt something similar. I draw your attention to 2019, where the Shiv Sena did this. They were in an alliance with the BJP, and then they went and formed a Maharashtra Vikas Aghadi. And then, of course, I mean, the way BJP does is, it is unprecedented, the scale at which they take this defection and movement. Just want to come back now to the point on the law. You see, one approach is to see this as political maneuvering. The other is to actually care about the last person in the queue in a democracy, that is the voter. So do you feel that in a country that prides itself in being a democracy, should something like this be considered an unethical practice or an immoral practice? Or an illegal practice?
Yeah. So first, I want to push back a little bit on what you just said. It's not unprecedented. Defections used to be absolutely widespread in the 70s, in the early 80s, which is why we have an anti-defection law in the first place. The recently departed constitutional expert Subhash Kashyap measured that between 68 and 70, something like 1,400 defections took place. State governments used to fall. So this was a widespread situation. The anti-defection law sought to check that, and it did so, for some time. But soon enough, political parties across the board found basically loopholes and ways to basically circumvent the practice of defections, or disguised defections, or defection by stealth, if you decide how you want to call them. Is it a democratic problem? Is it a problem for democracy? Yes, absolutely. Because as I said, it changes the outcome of an election after an election takes place, right? It is also a form of betrayal of the mandate received by these individual MPs who choose to defect. In a regular setting, you would say that the voters have the power to punish those individuals afterwards, whenever they contest next, and in reality they do, right? But for the sake of preserving elected majorities, it's a legitimate question to ask whether the anti-defection law should be changed or should be amended. It's not surprising that punishing defectors lists among the demands of the Cockroach Junta Party, right? This is one of the points that that offends them, that in their democratic fiber, and so it seems to me, but the problem is that it's up to the very people who are concerned directly by that practice to decide if they want to legislate on it. And the problem, it's a catch-22 situation, because the opposition may reel about those defections now, but some of these parties used to do that when they were in power, and maybe they want to preserve the ability to do that eventually to the BJP when the roles eventually might be reversed. And so I'm not quite sure to see how that would happen. There's always the PIL route, there's always the judiciary. This is very lengthy, and the judiciary is usually reluctant to legislate on the legislators or to take decisions on the legislator. I mean, so it's all a bit complicated. But there are solutions that might be debated. Should we allow someone who defects, who choose or resigns, to contest in the very next elections? Shouldn't there be like a waiting time? I'm not suggesting that they should be made ineligible, because after all, they have the right, to contest elections. But maybe giving them a little bit of waiting time to reflect about what they did, and let someone take their place in the short run might be a way to disincentivize those defections. At any rate, we need to be very cautious that the way we handle the situation does not break any other or any further democratic norms in the process. Sometimes we end up, doing bad, in the name of doing good. And here we're talking about really fundamental right. Eligibility is as important and as sacred a right as the right to vote, right? Any citizen who meet the condition should be allowed to contest. Now there are conditions under which ineligibility can be declared, certain criminal cases and so forth. And so it's a matter of discussion. There should be a public debate whether betraying, voters' mandate should list among those conditions that make, someone lose their right to contest, even for a short while.
Gilles, you see, it's I just want to understand how you look at it. Slightly complicated in the Indian context, as in our system of electing our lawmakers, whether at the state level or at the center level, Lok Sabha or Vidhan Sabha, is an individual. You form a party, all right, but then what you're taught in civics books is that you elect a person on the basis of the promises made, and that individual goes and represents you. Now, it does that in the form of a party. So either when it comes to an anti-defection law, either there should be no anti-defection law, because here is a case where an individual is representing me, so that individual can decide in the best of interest, in his wisdom or her wisdom, where to go. Or there should be such a strong anti-defection law where it is banned in law that you cannot switch for 5 years. The formulation in which you went and sought your vote, that should be the formation for the next 5 years. Or otherwise resign, come back, put up a new party symbol, and then get re-elected. I want to know your views.
Yeah. So I don't know that people should be necessarily stuck with their party, for 5 years, by law, because after all, a party leader can do something utterly egregious, or there can be a change of circumstances that, demands a resignation, or people should be able to resign, on the basis of their conscience, or maybe because, they just, have had it. And so there should be an exit, right? They should not be forced to serve their first five term. I don't see the democratic value in doing that. That being said, the question is whether, should there be consequences, for doing so. I mean, this question has a lot to do with, the way political parties are organized, right? Because after all, in a functioning democracy, or in a conventional democracy, or with conventional political parties rather, if you have a problem with a leader, you mount a leadership contest, right? Or leadership challenge. You gather people around you within your party and you sort of contest the position of the leader inside your party. That does not happen in political parties in India, in any political party in India. Why? Because they are hyper-centralized, because they tend to be very personalized, because in effect, political parties are the private property of individuals or families at times. And so they don't have the procedure, they don't have the internal democracy that would allow those questions to be handled internally rather than outside. And so for those who find themselves compelled or incentivized to leave their party, they have no other choice than actually resign, doing it spectacularly, rather than address those questions inside. So there's a problem. Now, with regard to the anti-defection law, there were other provisions than preventing or creating the rules for defecting or splitting parties. There were other provisions that were added that have actually killed all kinds of internal pluralism within parties, which is the prohibition for MPs to vote differently than what their party directs them to, right? And so it sort of precludes the ability of an MP or an MLA to vote against their party in if their conscience tells them to do so. It has killed parliamentary debate. It has killed. So it has created this imposition by law of party discipline, which means that the MP or the MLA is nothing more than has to be nothing more than an obedient servant of the party they belong to. And so that sort of creates this position where it's sort of a make or break. Either you toe the line and you do as told, or you find yourself unable to do that and you have to leave. And if you want to have a career, well, you will naturally try to join a different party. So the situation is a little bit more complex. So the law, of course, is there. It is effective. It creates these loopholes, even these roadmaps to how to defect. There are all sorts of wrong incentives and wrong kind of politics that take place in incentivizing people to shift party allegiance and party affiliation. But there are also systemic factors, built into how parties function in India, how parliamentarism function in India, or dysfunctions in India. And so you have to take all these factors as a whole, and it makes the situation actually quite complicated.
My final question, and I again come back to the people because that's what democracy is all about. Do you feel that the much disturbing trend for any democracy is where people have normalized defection? And all right, these politicians, neta log, it's normal for them to switch from here to there. Fine, we have accepted this. He was here, Nitish Kumar Paltu Ram, so it becomes a joke. Do you feel this normalization is actually far more dangerous than anything else?
Well, yes, because it makes people less likely to stand up, for democratic norms, right? Because you expect these norms to be flouted, and so a lot of people, have grown, cynical about the way politics work, the way election work, the way, even representation work. Honestly, you can't really blame voters for being cynical about their MPs, and they don't really bear a responsibility because candidates to elections are selected from the top. It's the buck stops really at party leadership, who ultimately decide who gets to be a candidate or not. These are not people who emerge out of popular support or movement or from below. These are individuals picked up because they meet certain criteria, and so in my mind, the ire should be directed towards party leaders rather than individual MPs who are sort of cogs in a system that they have very little control on.
All right. Gilles Verniers, always a pleasure talking to you. Thank you so much, sir. Thank you.